The champagne glass didn't just fall. It exploded against the bulkhead, a starburst of crystal and expensive vintage that mirrored the sudden fracturing of my composure. At 30,000 feet, precision is a luxury you lose the moment the cabin pressure drops. The engine screamed, a terrifying mechanical howl that drowned out every quarterly projection I'd memorized. And there she was, Maya Paul. Not the enemy, not the rival, but the woman sitting mere inches across the aisle. In that terrifying second, as gravity betrayed us, the corporate war with her brother didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the sudden, undeniable heat of her gaze locking onto mine. To understand why that moment shattered me, you have to understand the armor I wore. I am Madison. I don't do chaos. I run a global logistics empire where every container, every shipping lane, every microsecond is accounted for. My life is a grid of sterile boardrooms and obedient staff who know better than to speak before spoken to. Control isn't just a strategy, it's my oxygen. Or it was, until the Paul Group merger. Julian Paul. Just saying his name makes my jaw ache. He turned a standard acquisition into a blood sport, a scorched earth campaign that left both our boards exhausted and wary. He fought dirty, he fought loud, and I fought with silence and precision. We were stalemated, two titans circling each other, waiting for the other to blink. The London summit was supposed to be the final battleground. I had my strategy mapped out, my leverage calculated. I was ready for war. Then, the volcano in Iceland decided to clear its throat. Airspace closed, commercial flights grounded, the entire continent paralyzed by a cloud of ash. But CEOs don't stop for weather. When the call came that a single private charter had a window to fly low and fast to London, I took it. I didn't ask who else was on the manifest. I assumed it would be Julian, ready for one last pre-summit spar. I was wrong. The private lounge at JFK was quiet, the air conditioned to a perfect, sterile chill. I walked in, heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the marble, ready to face Julian. Instead, I found her, Maya. She wasn't Julian. She didn't wear the aggressive, bespoke suits that cost more than my first car. She wore a soft, charcoal sweater that looked impossibly warm, and she was reading a paperback, not a spreadsheet. She was the curator of the Paul Foundation's art collection, the soft power to Julian's hard edge. I'd seen her in photos, always in the background, always watching with a slight, enigmatic smile. She looked up when I entered. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and completely devoid of the hostility I expected. "Madison," she said. Her voice was low, textured like good velvet. She didn't stand up. She didn't offer a handshake. She just acknowledged me. "Maya," I replied, keeping my voice cool, my posture rigid. "Where is your brother?" "Julian took the earlier flight before the ash spread," she said, turning a page. "It seems you're stuck with the B team." She wasn't the B team. I knew that instantly. The way she sat, relaxed but alert, told me she possessed a different kind of power. While Julian blustered and threatened, Maya observed. She was the stillness in the center of their family's storm. And that unnerved me more than Julian's shouting ever could. We sat in that lounge for an hour, the silence stretching between us like a wire pulled tight. I checked emails, I made calls, I pretended she wasn't there. But I could feel her. I could feel her eyes on me. Not judging, just seeing. It was invasive. It was intimate. "They're ready for us," the attendant announced, breaking the tension. We walked to the tarmac together. The wind was picking up, whipping my hair across my face, stinging my eyes. The jet waited, sleek and silver against the gray sky. I gripped my briefcase, my shield. Maya walked beside me, her hands in her pockets, head tilted back to look at the clouds. "It looks angry up there," she murmured. "It's just turbulence," I said, dismissing the sky like a disobedient employee. "We'll be above it." "I don't think you can rise above everything, Madison," she said softly. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a second, the wind seemed to stop. The rivalry, the merger, the millions of dollars at stake, it all faded into the background noise of the airport. All I saw was a woman who knew something I didn't. a woman who wasn't afraid of the storm. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just climbed the stairs into the cabin, pulling my armor tight around me, unaware that in a few hours, she would be the only thing holding me together. The door sealed shut, locking us in with the coming chaos. The cabin was a study in aggressive luxury. Cream leather that smelled of money, walnut trim polished to a mirror shine. But for all its opulence, the space felt immediately suffocatingly small. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a gilded cage suspended in the sky. And I was locked in with the one person who could dismantle my composure without saying a word. The seating was a tactical disaster. The configuration forced us to face each other in club seats. There was no escaping her. I sat down, arranging my blazer with unnecessary precision, creating a barrier of fabric and professional detachment. Maya took the seat opposite me. She didn't fuss, she didn't rearrange. She just settled in, her movements fluid and unbothered, as if she were sitting in her own living room, rather than a pressurized tube hurtling toward a corporate battlefield. I shifted my legs, tucking them back to maximize the scant space between us. Maya noticed. I saw the corner of her mouth twitch, a ghost of a smile she suppressed instantly. She knew she unnerved me. She knew her proximity was a weapon, even if she wasn't wielding it with malice. I pulled out my tablet, the screen lighting up with the comforting, sterile glow of spreadsheets. I immersed myself in the numbers, revenue streams and assets. I tapped the screen with rhythmic, sharp strikes, a busy signal to anyone listening. I am working. I am unavailable. But the cabin was too quiet. The engines thrummed, a low vibration felt in the teeth. In that silence, Maya's presence was amplified. She wasn't working. She had opened that paperback again, holding it loosely in one hand. She turned a page, the sound of paper sliding against paper impossibly loud. She wasn't armor-plated like me. She was open. Vulnerable, theoretically, yet she seemed the stronger one. I tried to focus on the acquisition strategy, but my senses were betraying me. The recycled air carried a scent that cut through the smell of new leather. Sandalwood. And something fresher, like rain on hot pavement. It was Maya. It wasn't cloying or floral. It was earthy, grounded, and distracting. Every time I inhaled, she was there, bypassing the data wall I'd built. I watched her hand turn another page. Her fingers were long, unadorned by the heavy rings I wore. There was a grace to her stillness that irritated me. Why wasn't she prepping? Why wasn't she strategizing? Her brother was out for blood, and she was reading fiction. Or maybe it was just confidence. Then the flight attendant moved through the cabin like a shadow, murmuring about evening service. She dimmed the main lights, plunging us into a twilight of soft amber accents. It was meant to be relaxing. Instead, it felt intimate. The world outside was a void. The world inside shrank to just us. My tablet screen was a harsh blue beacon, illuminating my face, exposing the tension I was trying to hide. Maya closed her book. She placed it on the side table and looked out the window. "Do you ever stop?" she asked. She didn't turn her head. I froze, my finger hovering over a report. "Stop what?" "Running," she said, finally turning to face me. The shadows played across her features. "You're running a marathon in your head, Madison. I can hear it from here." "I'm working," I corrected, my voice tight. "Some of us have a merger to salvage." "The merger can wait until London," she countered gently. "We're in the sky. No one can reach us here. You can put the shield down for a few hours. I promise I won't attack." "I don't trust you," I said. It was the honest truth. "I know," she replied, and there was no offense in her tone, only a quiet acceptance. "That's why you're exhausted." She leaned back, closing her eyes. But the damage was done. She had seen through the work, through the armor. She knew I was afraid. As the plane hummed toward the storm, I realized the most dangerous thing wasn't the weather. It was the woman sitting across from me, breathing softly, smelling of rain, who made me want to do the one thing I couldn't afford to do. Surrender. 3 hours. That's how long the silence had stretched, tight and humming like a high-tension wire. My tablet was still in my hand, but the numbers had blurred into a meaningless stream of blue light. I wasn't reading anymore. I was hiding. The cabin was a sealed capsule of twilight, The only sound the steady, monotonous drone of the engines and the occasional clink of ice shifting in a glass. Maya hadn't moved much. She had ordered a glass of wine, a deep red that caught the dim light, swirling it gently but rarely drinking. She was waiting. I could feel it. She was waiting for me to break. It's absurd, isn't it? Her voice cut through the hum, low and resonant. I didn't look up immediately. I tapped a cell on the spreadsheet that didn't need tapping. What is? I asked, keeping my eyes on the screen. This, she said. I heard the soft rustle of fabric as she shifted. 2 women, suspended in the dark over the Atlantic, pretending we aren't exhausted by a war we didn't start. I finally looked up. She was watching me over the rim of her glass. Her expression wasn't mocking. It was tired. Genuine fatigue etched around her eyes. It mirrored the ache behind my own temples. I didn't start it, I said. The defense, automatic, practiced. But I intend to finish it. Your brother made this personal. Julian makes everything personal, Maya conceded. She set the glass down. He thinks business is a contact sport, but you treat it like chess. Cold, calculated. Is that a criticism? It's an observation. You play the game better than he does because you don't let yourself feel it. But the cost... She let the sentence hang there, heavy in the recycled air. The cost must be enormous. I wanted to snap at her. I wanted to tell her that the cost was none of her business, that my armor was necessary, that feeling things was a luxury I couldn't afford. But the words died in my throat, because she was right. And in this small, dim space, with the world thousands of feet below us, the lie felt too heavy to carry. I locked my tablet. The screen went dark, leaving my reflection staring back at me, pale, tight-lipped. I set it aside. The physical act felt like laying down a weapon. I'm tired, I admitted. The words were a whisper, barely audible over the engines. It was a slip, a crack in the porcelain. I waited for her to pounce, to store that weakness away for Julian to use later. She didn't. She just looked at me, her gaze unflinching. It wasn't the predatory stare of a rival CEO looking for an opening. It was precise. I know, she said softly. I can see it. You carry the weight of the whole world in that briefcase, Madison. Doesn't it get heavy? Someone has to carry it, I replied, but the bite was gone from my voice. Does it have to be you? If I don't, who will? My board? They want profits, not burdens. My staff? They want direction, not doubt. And what do you want? The question hung there. Simple. Devastating. I opened my mouth to give a prepared answer. Market share, legacy, growth. But I stopped. What did I want? I wanted to sleep for a week. I wanted to stop checking my phone every 3 minutes. I looked at her. I wanted someone to look at me the way she was looking at me right now. Like I was human. Like I was breakable. I don't know, I said honestly. I haven't asked myself that in a long time. Maya leaned forward slightly. The distance between our knees seemed to shrink, charged with a sudden, new energy. It wasn't hostility anymore. It was curiosity. Wary, dangerous curiosity. Maybe you should, she murmured, before the armor fuses to the skin and you forget how to take it off. Her eyes held mine, dark and warm, and for a moment, the cabin felt smaller, hotter. The air thickened, heavy with things we weren't saying. I felt a pull, a magnetic drag toward her that had nothing to do with gravity. I wanted to lean in. I wanted to know if her skin was as warm as her voice. Then the speakers crackled. Ladies, this is the captain. The voice was tight, stripped of its usual reassuring cadence. We're picking up some unexpected severe weather patterns ahead. I'm going to need you to fasten your seatbelts. Tight. The spell broke. The warmth vanished, replaced by a cold spike of adrenaline. I looked at the seatbelt sign as it flashed on with an aggressive ping. Just turbulence, I said, but my voice wavered. Maya didn't look at the sign. She kept her eyes on me, and the fear I saw there mirrored my own. I don't think so, she whispered. And then the floor dropped out from under us. The sensation wasn't falling. It was being erased. 1 second, I was sitting in a leather seat, breathing recycled air and calculating profit margins. The next, the floor simply vanished. Gravity didn't just reverse, it dissolved. I felt my body lift, straining violently against the lap belt, a ragdoll physics lesson I hadn't signed up for. The engine noise shifted from a steady, expensive hum to a mechanical scream, a high-pitched whine that vibrated in the marrow of my bones. It was the sound of a machine fighting a losing battle against the atmosphere. The cabin, previously a sanctuary of cream and walnut, became a kaleidoscope of violence. The wine glass Maya had set down didn't spill, it launched. Red liquid painted the air in a slow-motion arc, a suspended ribbon of burgundy, before the plane slammed downward again, catching us in a brutal, bone-jarring halt. The glass shattered against the bulkhead, a starburst of crystal shrapnel raining down on the carpet like diamonds. The lights surged, flared white-hot, and then died, leaving us in a strobe-lit nightmare of flickering emergency LEDs. My hands, usually so steady, usually so capable of signing billion-dollar contracts without a tremor, clawed at the armrests. I wasn't gripping leather. I was trying to anchor myself to the earth that was suddenly 5 miles too far away. The leather groaned under the pressure of my fingernails. My breath caught in a throat suddenly too tight to let air pass. This was the one scenario I couldn't strategize my way out of. I couldn't negotiate with an air pocket. I couldn't fire the wind. For the first time in 20 years, I was completely, utterly irrelevant. The CEO, the Titan, the Iron Lady, none of those titles mattered to the physics tearing at the wings. I was just meat in a metal tube. I turned my head. It was an instinctual movement, seeking a reference point in the spinning world. I expected to see Maya screaming. I expected hysteria. I expected the soft power curator to crumble under the pressure. But she was silent. She sat rigid, her back pressed hard against the seat, her hands gripping the edges of her table so hard her skin looked translucent. She wasn't looking at the window. She wasn't looking at the ceiling. She was looking at me. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown so large they swallowed the iris, dark pools of absolute terror. But they were locked on mine. In the flickering strobe of the cabin lights, which were now pulsing in a sickly, dying rhythm, her gaze was a tether. She wasn't looking for me to save her. She knew I couldn't. She was looking for a witness. She was looking for someone to be with her in the dark. The hostility of the lounge, the cool politeness of the last 3 hours, it all evaporated. There is no rivalry when the sky is falling. There is only the person breathing the same thinning air as you. The plane didn't just drop again. It rolled. The horizon line, invisible outside the dark windows, tilted 45 degrees. The cabin listed violently to the left. My tablet, the shield I had used to keep her out, the repository of all my control, lost its friction battle. It slid across the table, launched into the aisle, and smashed against the opposite seat leg. The screen fractured, a spiderweb of cracks obliterating the spreadsheets. I stared at it, oddly fixated on the destruction of my data, realizing that the numbers were going to die with me. Then came the sound that everyone who flies dreads. The sound that signals the transition from rough air to emergency. A mechanical thunk hiss. The panel above us popped open. The yellow masks fell. They didn't drop gracefully. They dangled, bouncing on their plastic tubes like grotesque pendulums, swinging in time with the shuddering fuselage. They looked ridiculous. Bright, cheerful yellow rubber cups that promised life in a cabin that smelled of ozone and spilled wine. The pilot didn't come back on the intercom. The silence from the cockpit was louder than the wind. We were 2 powerful women reduced to fumbling children, grasping for plastic lifelines while the world screamed. The yellow masks swung like mocking pendulums above us, but neither of us reached for them. In that suspended second between life and whatever came after, instinct didn't drive me toward the oxygen. It drove me toward her. I didn't make a conscious decision. There was no boardroom strategy, no risk assessment. My hand simply moved. It shot across the terrifyingly small distance of the aisle, a desperate, frantic, seeking thing. And Maya was already there. She met me halfway, her movement mirroring mine, stripping away the months of corporate posturing in a single, frantic heartbeat. Our palms collided. It wasn't a gentle hold. It was a collision of skin and bone, a desperate locking of fingers that felt less like comfort and more like survival. And then I felt it. The precise, crushing strength of her grip. You think you know a person's hands. You see them sign contracts, hold wine glasses, turn pages, but you don't know them until they are the only thing keeping you from flying apart. Maya's hand was smaller than mine, but the force behind her grip was staggering. Her fingers laced through mine with a violence born of terror, digging into the back of my hand, her nails leaving distinct crescent moon indentations I would find later, like bruises on a map. It wasn't just a hold, it was an anchor. She was grounding herself firmly in my flesh, and I was letting her. The heat was immediate. In the freezing cabin, her skin burned against mine. It was a sudden shock of raw warmth. The rivalry, the Paul group, the merger, the millions at stake, didn't just fade. It evaporated. There was no CEO here. There was no curator. There was only the frantic, undeniable reality of another human pulse beating against my own. I looked at her. I couldn't look away. The strobe of the emergency lights cut her face into sharp relief. The wide, dark eyes, the parted lips. She was terrified. The fear was naked, unmasked. And in that raw terror, I saw my own reflection. We were mirrors in the dark, stripped down to our most basic need for connection. The plane bucked again, a terrifying, violent lateral slam that threw us against our seatbelts. My shoulder hit the wall, her head snapped back. But our hands didn't break. Instead, the grip tightened into something painful and necessary. Our knees knocked together, bone against bone, and I didn't pull back. I pressed my leg into hers, kneading the friction, squeezing her hand with a ferocity that would have terrified my board. I wasn't just accepting her support, I was demanding it, clinging to the only fixed point in a universe that had lost its axis. The cabin groaned, a terrifying sound of metal stressed beyond its limits. But my entire world had narrowed down to that knot of bone and muscle. So I held on. And Maya held on to me. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the violent thrashing changed. It didn't stop, but the sickening drops ceased. The plane leveled out, shuddering into a steady, terrifying vibration. The screams of the engines lowered from a shriek to a strained, heavy, mechanical roar. We were still flying. We were still here. But the silence that followed was heavier than the noise. It was the silence of survival, thick and charged. And in that silence, neither of us moved to release the other. The grip remained, locked and burning, a secret pact sealed in the terrifying dark. The violent shaking had subsided into a steady, terrifying vibration as the plane leveled out. But the adrenaline still hammered in my chest. Logic dictated I should let go. The crisis was past. My brain, usually so efficient at compartmentalizing disaster, screamed at me to retract, to rebuild the walls. But my hand refused. It stayed woven with hers, a stubborn, desperate knot of flesh and bone. The sweat on our palms was cooling, tacky and real, but where our skin met, there was a steady, radiating heat. It was the only warmth left in the world. I stared at our joined hands, resting awkwardly on the armrest between us, like a foreign object that belonged to neither of us, yet defined us both. The cabin was a wreck. Pillows were scattered like storm debris, and the shattered glass from her wine glistened on the carpet like dangerous confetti. But the silence was the heaviest part. It wasn't the empty, sterile silence of the lounge. It was dense, charged with the electricity of survival. We were breathing in sync now, ragged, shallow gasps that slowly deepened into something resembling life. I looked up from our hands to her face. Maya was pale, her dark hair pulled loose, strands framing a face stripped of all its social defenses. She wasn't looking at the wreckage. She was looking at me, her gaze intense, searching for damage in the dim emergency light. Then she moved. She didn't pull back. She leaned in. She leaned across the aisle, invading the space I had guarded so jealously. I could feel the warmth radiating from her body, a stark contrast to the sudden chill of the air conditioning. She brought her face close to mine, close enough that I could count the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "Madison?" she whispered. Her voice was a ghost of sound, a breath against the recycled air, intimate and low. It brushed against my cheek like a physical touch. "Are you back with me?" The sound of my name on her lips, stripped of professional courtesy, hit me harder than the turbulence. It wasn't a challenge. It was an anchor. I tried to nod, but my body felt stiff. "I'm here," I managed, my voice cracking. It was weak. It was pathetic. It was the most honest thing I'd said in a decade. I should have pulled my hand away then. I should have smoothed my blazer. But I couldn't. The texture of her skin, the slight callus on her thumb, the dampness of her palm, was the only reality I could grasp. If I let go, I would float away. I thought... She stopped, swallowing hard. Her thumb brushed over my knuckles, a slow, deliberate caress that sent a shiver straight down my spine. I thought that was it. The end of the Paul legacy. The end of everything. I wasn't thinking about the merger, I admitted, the confession tumbling out. I was thinking that I didn't want to die alone in the dark with a stranger. "Am I still a stranger?" she asked. The question hung between us, fragile. I looked at our hands again, seeing how perfectly they fit. "No," I whispered. "I don't think you are." In that twilight cabin, the lines blurred. She wasn't Julian's sister, or the curator. She was the woman who hadn't screamed. She was the woman who had reached out when the world fell apart. I looked at her, and I didn't see a threat. I saw a sanctuary. I saw strength that didn't look like armor, strength that was pliant and warm. I realized with a jolt that I didn't want to be anywhere else. I didn't want to be safe in my office. I wanted to be right here, in this terrifying, intimate proximity, holding on to her like she was the only solid ground on Earth. A beam of light cut through the gloom. The cockpit door opened. The flight attendant stumbled in with a flashlight, looking shaken. "Miss Paul? Ma'am? Are you all right?" The spell wavered. The world was intruding. Instinct took over. Not the instinct to survive, but the instinct to protect this new, fragile thing. We didn't let go. Instead, in a synchronized movement that felt practiced, we pulled our joined hands beneath the cashmere blanket that had fallen across my lap. We hid the connection. "We're fine," I called out, my voice steady, my hands squeezing Maya's tightly in the dark beneath the wool. "We're just fine." The remaining hours didn't pass in minutes or miles. They passed in the steady, rhythmic vibration of the fuselage and the heavy silence of the dark. Outside, the storm had been left behind, replaced by the vast, indifferent black of the Atlantic night. Inside, the emergency lights had been swapped for the low, amber glow of the main cabin, but neither of us moved to turn on a reading lamp. We stayed in the shadows, two survivors huddled under a shared blanket, the world narrowed down to the few inches of space between our seats. The adrenaline that had spiked during the free fall was beginning to metabolize, but it wasn't fading into exhaustion. It was transmuting into something else entirely. Something heavier. Something sharper. I took a breath, a shaky, shallow thing, and that's when the third wave hit me. It wasn't the terror anymore. It was the scent. In the sealed, pressurized intimacy of the cabin, the air had thickened. It wasn't just the smell of expensive leather or the lingering metallic tang of ozone from the storm. It was her. I inhaled, registering the specific, complex chemistry of Maya Paul. The scent I'd caught earlier was still there, but it had been heated by fear, deepened by the proximity of death. It was the scent of warm skin and salt, a biological signal that cut through every layer of my professional conditioning. It was the smell of being alive, and it was the most intoxicating thing I had ever encountered. Under the heavy wool of the cashmere blanket, the nature of our connection began to mutate. The desperate, bone-crushing grip of survival softened, but it didn't let go. It evolved. My hand, which had been an anchor, became an explorer. My thumb, moving of its own volition, began to trace the ridge of her knuckles. It was a slow, deliberate movement, a rhythmic caress over the tendons and the soft skin between her fingers. I felt the tension in her hand shift. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers relaxed, opening slightly to allow my thumb deeper access to her palm. It was a silent conversation, a question asked against my skin and answered with a yielding pressure that sent a jolt of heat straight to my chest. I looked at her, really looked at her, in the dim light. The shadows hollowed out her cheekbones and made her eyes look like endless dark pools. This was Maya. This was Paul. This was the sister of the man trying to dismantle my legacy. Julian would have looked at this moment, his sister holding hands with his rival under a blanket at 30,000 feet, and called it treason. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt like a traitor to my own board, to the strategy I had spent months perfecting. But as my thumb brushed the pulse point at her wrist, feeling the steady, rapid beat of her heart, the war felt like a distant, childish abstraction. The only strategy that made sense was the friction of her skin against mine. The air between us seemed to ionize, charged with a static that raised the hair on my arms. The fear had burned away the pretense, leaving a raw, exposed desire that was terrifying in its intensity. Maya turned her head, her gaze locking onto mine. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The question was there, loud and unflinching in the silence. "Do you feel this?" She leaned forward. The movement was slow, agonizingly precise. I didn't retreat. I leaned in to meet her, drawn by a magnetic pull that felt inevitable. The distance between us, which had been a chasm of rivalry hours ago, was now nothing. Our knees were pressed together, a solid point of contact. Her face was inches from mine. I could feel the warmth of her breath against my cheek, a soft, rhythmic ghost. I watched her eyes drop to my lips, then back up to my gaze, dark and heavy with intent. The proximity was suffocating. I could see the tiny flutter of her pulse in her neck. I could smell the heat radiating off her. My heart hammered against my ribs, a traitorous drumbeat demanding I close the gap. We were on the edge of a precipice, leaning out over the void, ready to fall into a different kind of chaos. Then the speakers crackled. "Flight attendants, prepare for landing." The pilot's voice was a bucket of ice water. It was sharp, loud, and intrusive, shattering the fragile glass of the moment. We jerked back as if we'd been burned. The spell broke, leaving us gasping in the sudden, cold reality of the cabin. Maya straightened in her seat, her hand slipping from mine under the blanket, the loss of contact feeling like a physical wound. I cleared my throat, smoothing my blazer, trying to reassemble the CEO from the wreckage of the woman who had almost just kissed her enemy. Outside, the clouds parted, revealing the scattered diamond grid of London below, a sprawling reminder that the war, and the war, was waiting for us. The wheels hit the tarmac, a jarring reminder that gravity always wins. The plane shuddered, the brakes screamed against the wet runway, and the deceleration forced us forward against our seatbelts. That physical jolt broke the last thread of the sanctuary we had built in the sky. The cabin lights flickered up to full brightness, washing out our shadows. The reality of the merger, the summit, and the war waiting outside the door rushed in to fill the vacuum. I felt Maya's hand slip away. It wasn't a quick release. It was a slow, reluctant slide of skin against skin, friction yielding to distance. When her fingertips cleared mine, the loss of contact felt like a physical wound, a sudden amputation of warmth that left my hand feeling phantom and cold. I stared at my own palm for a second, disoriented by its emptiness, before the reflex took over. I made a fist, hiding the evidence, and turned away. It was time to put the armor back on. I stood up, my legs steady despite the tremor in my chest. I smoothed my blazer, checking the buttons. I checked my reflection, hair slightly mussed, eyes too wide, lips swollen. I fixed it all. I pulled the hair back, narrowed the eyes, pressed the lips into a thin, professional line. I rebuilt Madison the CEO, terrified that if I missed a spot, everyone would see the woman who had almost begged for a kiss at 30,000 feet. Maya was slower. She gathered her book and her coat with a fluid, unhurried grace that maddened me. She didn't check a mirror. She just stood, pulled on that charcoal coat, and looked at me. There was no mask on her face, only a quiet, unnerving observation. She watched the reconstruction I was doing, and her expression, a mix of pity and challenge, told me she wasn't buying it. The cabin door opened, and the cool, damp air of London invaded the space. It smelled of jet fuel and rain, erasing the lingering scent of sandalwood. We walked down the metal stairs into the night. The wind bit. It was a relief in a way. The cold froze the heat that was still threatening to consume me. On the tarmac, the lines were drawn. 2 black sedans waited on the wet pavement, engines idling, exhaust pluming into the gray air. My team stood by the first car, my assistant holding a phone, my driver holding the door. They looked anxious. By the second car, a man in a Paul Group uniform waited, Julian's driver, the enemy camp. We reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. The noise of the airport was deafening, but the silence between us held its own weight. I turned to her. I needed to say something, but the professional words died on my tongue. Maya looked at me, unflinching. The wind blew a strand of dark hair across her face, but she didn't move it. Her eyes held mine, dark and heavy with the secret we were now carrying. She didn't extend a hand for a handshake. That was impossible now. Touching her casually would be like touching a live wire. Instead, she just nodded. A small, almost imperceptible dip of her chin. I see you. I know. Be careful, Madison, she said. Her voice was snatched away by the wind, but I saw the movement of her lips. It wasn't a threat. It was genuine concern. You too, I whispered. She turned and walked toward her brother's car. I watched her go, watching the way she moved through the rain, until she slid into the back seat and the door slammed shut. The tint of the window swallowed her whole. I got into my own car. The interior was warm. My assistant started talking, but I didn't hear a word. I stared out the window as we pulled away, watching the rain, blurring the city lights. I clenched my hand tight, closing my eyes, and for a terrifying moment, I could still feel the precise, crushing pressure of her grip. The jet was gone, the storm was over, but the turbulence was just beginning. 7 days. That's how long it takes for a stalemate to rot. The London summit was a catastrophe of silence. Julian shouted, posturing for a room full of suits, but I wasn't really there. My body sat at the mahogany table, rigid and professional, but my mind was drifting at 30,000 feet, trapped in the visceral memory of a terrifying descent. Every time I looked at a contract, I saw the spiderweb cracks on my tablet. Every time I shook a hand, I felt the phantom pressure of her grip, precise and crushing. I was a ghost haunting my own merger. I arranged the meeting. Not at the office. The air there was too thin, too sterile. But at the Tate Modern. Neutral ground. Her ground. I told my assistant it was a back-channel negotiation, a necessary step to unblock the deal. It was a lie. It was a surrender. I found her in the Rothko room. The space was cavernous, the lighting low and reverent. She stood in front of a canvas of deep maroon and black, a void of color that vibrated with the same intensity as the silence in the jet. She wore a coat the color of slate, structured but soft, her hands buried deep in her pockets. She didn't turn when I approached, but I saw the line of her shoulders tense. She knew. "You're late," she said. Her voice didn't echo. The room swallowed it, keeping it intimate. "The traffic," I lied. I moved to stand beside her, close enough to smell that scent again. Sandalwood and rain, now mixed with the dry, dusty smell of old canvas. "Julian is threatening an injunction. He says the valuation is insulting." Maya finally turned. Her eyes were dark, tired, stripped of the politeness she wore like a shield at the airport. "Do you care?" "I should. My board expects me to care. Millions are on the line. But do you?" I looked at the painting, then at her. The question cut through the corporate noise. No. The truth was a physical relief, a weight dropping from my chest. I don't care about the valuation. I don't care about the merger. I haven't slept in 6 nights, Maya. Every time I close my eyes, I feel the floor dropping out. 7, she corrected softly. I haven't slept in 7. The admission hung between us. The distance was 3 feet. It felt like miles. It felt like nothing. "This war," I said, my voice dropping to that hushed register we'd found in the dark. "It belongs to my predecessors. It belongs to your brother's ego. It doesn't belong to us." "Then stop fighting it," she said. "Julian wants to win. You just want to survive. There's a difference." I took a step closer. I wasn't the CEO of a logistics empire anymore. I was the woman who had realized in a flash of lightning that she didn't want to die alone. "I don't know how to stop," I admitted. Control is all I have. Maya took her hand out of her pocket. She didn't reach for me. Not yet. She just let it hang there, open. An invitation. You didn't have control up there. You had me. I looked at her hand. I remembered the strength of it, the crescent moons her nails had left on my skin, the heat that had anchored me when gravity failed. I want to know if it was just the adrenaline, I whispered, the words terrifying me more than the turbulence ever did. I want to know if the heat was real, or if we just hallucinated intimacy because we thought we were dying. It was real, she said. Her voice was steady, unflinching. It's still real. The plane landed, Madison. We didn't. I closed the gap. The air displaced by my movement felt electric. I reached out. This time, there was no turbulence to force my hand. There was only desire. My fingers brushed hers, a tentative, terrifying contact. The spark was immediate, a jolt that traveled up my arm and settled heavy in my chest. It wasn't fear this time. It was recognition. I laced my fingers through hers. The fit was perfect. The friction of her palm against mine erased the cold of the last week. The memory of the cockpit rushed back, but grounded now in the safety of the earth. The silence of the gallery wrapped around us, a new kind of sanctuary. Julian will kill us if he finds out, I murmured, staring at her mouth. Let him try, Maya replied. Her thumb brushed my knuckle, that same slow, deliberate caress. He's just a businessman. We survived this guy. We stood in the quiet gallery. The noise of the city faded, hands finding each other again with deliberate precision. The sanctuary we built was right here. If you've ever found safety in the most unexpected place, subscribe for more stories of high stakes and deep connections. Tell me in the comments, what risk are you afraid to take?